Chapter 11. Outside the barracks. Snow. A meeting. For dreariness nothing could surpass a prospect in the outskirts of a certain town and military station, many miles north of Weatherbury, at a later hour on this same snowy evening, if that may be called a prospect of which the chief constituent was darkness. It was a night when sorrow may come to the brightest without causing any great sense of incongruity, when with impressible persons love becomes solicitousness, hope sinks to misgiving, and faith to hope; when the exercise of memory does not stir feelings of regret at opportunities for ambition that have been passed by, and anticipation does not prompt to enterprise. The scene was a public path, bordered on the left hand by a river, behind which rose a high wall. On the right was a tract of land, partly meadow and partly moor, reaching at its remote verge to a wide undulating upland. The changes of the seasons are less obtrusive on spots of this kind than amid woodland scenery. Still, to a close observer, they are just as perceptible. The difference is that their media of manifestation are less trite and familiar than such well-known ones as the bursting of the bud or the fall of the leaf. Many are not so stealthy and gradual as we may be apt to imagine in considering the general torpidity of a moor or waste. Winter, in coming to the country hereabout, advanced in well-marked stages, wherein might have been successfully observed the retreat of the snakes, the transformation of the ferns, the filling of the pools, a rising of fogs, the embrowning by frost, the collapse of the fungi, and an obliteration by snow. This climax of the series had been reached to-night on the aforesaid moor, and for the first time in the season its irregularities were forms without features, suggestive of anything, proclaiming nothing, and without more character than that of being the limit of something else, the lowest layer of a firmament of snow. From this chaotic skyful of crowding flakes, the mead and moor momentarily received additional clothing, only to appear momentarily more naked thereby. The vast arch of cloud above was strangely low, and it formed, as it were, the roof of a large dark cavern, gradually sinking in upon its floor, for the instinctive thought was that the snow lining the heavens and that encrusting the earth would soon unite into one mass without any intervening stratum of air at all. We turn our attention to the left-hand characteristics, which were flatness in respect of the river, verticality in respect of the wall behind it, and darkness as to both. These features made up the mass. If anything could be darker than the sky, it was the wall, and if anything could be gloomier than the wall, it was the river beneath. The indistinct summit of the façade was notched and pronged by chimneys here and there, and upon its face were faintly signified the oblong shapes of windows, though only in the upper part. Below, down to the water's edge, the flat was unbroken by hole or projection. An indescribable succession of dull blows, perplexing in their regularity, sent their sound with difficulty through the fluffy atmosphere. It was a neighbouring clock striking 10. The bell was in the open air, and being overlaid with several inches of muffling snow, had lost its voice for the time. About this hour the snow abated. 10 flakes fell where 20 had fallen, then one had the room of 10. Not long after, a form moved by the brink of the river. By its outline upon the colourless background a close observer might have seen that it was small. This was all that was positively discoverable, though it seemed human. The shape went slowly along, but without much exertion, for the snow, though sudden, was not yet more than 2 inches deep. At this time some words were spoken aloud. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Between each utterance the little shape advanced about half a dozen yards. It was evident now that the windows high in the wall were being counted. The word 5 represented a 5th window from the end of the wall. Here the spot stopped and dwindled smaller. The figure was stooping. Then a morsel of snow flew across the river towards the 5th window. It smacked against the wall at a point several yards from its mark. The throw was the idea of a man conjoined with the execution of a woman. No man who had ever seen a bird, rabbit, or squirrel in his childhood could possibly have thrown with such utter imbecility as was shown here. Another attempt, and another, till by degrees the wall must have become pimpled with the adhering lumps of snow. At last one fragment struck the 5th window. The river would have been seen by day to be of that deep, smooth sort which races middle and sides with the same gliding precision, any irregularities of speed being immediately corrected by a small whirlpool. Nothing was heard in reply to this signal but the gurgle and cluck of one of these invisible wheels, together with a few small sounds which a sad man would have called moans and a happy man laughter, caused by the flapping of the waters against trifling objects in other parts of the stream. The window was struck again in the same manner. Then a noise was heard, apparently produced by the opening of the window. This was followed by a voice from the same quarter. "Who's there?" The tones were masculine, and not those of surprise. The high wall being that of a barrack, and marriage being looked upon with disfavour by the army, assignations and communications had probably been made across the river before tonight. "Is it Sergeant Troy?" said the blurred spot in the snow, tremulously. This person was so much like a mere shade upon the earth, and the other speaker so much a part of the building, that one would have said the wall was holding a conversation with the snow. "Yes," came suspiciously from the shadow. "What girl are you?" "Oh, Frank, don't you know me?" said the spot. "Your wife, Fanny Robin." "Fanny?" said the wall, in utter astonishment. "Yes," said the girl, with a half-suppressed gasp of emotion. There was something in the woman's tone which was not that of the wife, and there was a manner in the man which was rarely a husband's. The dialogue went on. "How did you come here?" "I asked which was your window. Forgive me." "I did not expect you tonight. Indeed, I did not think you would come at all. It was a wonder you found me here. I am orderly tomorrow." "You said I was to come." "Well, I said you might." "Yes, I mean that I might. You are glad to see me, Frank?" "Oh, yes, of course."
Can you come to me?"
"My dear Fan, no. The bugle has sounded. The barrack gates are closed, and I have no leave. We are all of us as good as in the county gaol till tomorrow morning."
"Then I shan't see you till then."
The words were in a faltering tone of disappointment. "How did you get here from Weatherbury?"
"I walked. Some part of the way, the rest by the carriers."
"I am surprised."
"Yes, so am I. And Frank, when will it be?"
"What?"
"That you promised."
"I don't quite recollect."
"Oh, you do. Don't speak like that. It weighs me to the earth. It makes me say what ought to be said first by you."
"Never mind, say it."
"Oh, must I? It is, when shall we be married, Frank?"
"Oh, I see. Well, you have to get proper clothes."
"I have money. Will it be by banns or licence?"
"Banns, I should think."
"And we live in two parishes."
"Do we? What then?"
"My lodgings are in St. Mary's, and this is not, so they will have to be published in both."
"Is that the law?"
"Yes. Oh, Frank, you think me forward, I'm afraid. Don't, dear Frank, will you? For I love you so. And you said lots of times you would marry me, and I.
"Don't cry now. It is foolish. If I said so, of course I will."
And shall I put up the banns in my parish, and will you in yours?"
"Yes."
"Tomorrow?"
"Not tomorrow. We'll settle in a few days."
"You have the permission of the officers?"
"No, not yet."
"Oh, how is that? You said you almost had before you left Casterbridge."
"The fact is, I forgot to ask. Your coming like this is so sudden and unexpected."
"Yes, yes, it is. It was wrong of me to worry you. I'll go away now. Will you come and see me tomorrow at Mrs. Twillis's in North Street? I don't like to come to the barracks. There are bad women about, and they think me one."
"Quite so. I'll come to you, my dear. Good night."
"Good night, Frank. Good night."
And the noise was again heard of a window closing. The little spot moved away. When she passed the corner a subdued exclamation was heard inside the wall. "Ho ho, Sergeant! Ho ho!" An expostulation followed, but it was indistinct, and it became lost amid a low peal of laughter, which was hardly distinguishable from the gurgle of the tiny whirlpools outside. Chapter 12. Farmers, a Rule, an Exception. The first public evidence of Bathsheba's decision to be a farmer in her own person and by proxy no more was her appearance the following market day in the corn market at Casterbridge. The low though extensive hall, supported by beams and pillars, and latterly dignified by the name of Corn Exchange, was thronged with hot men who talked among each other in twos and threes, the speaker of the minute looking sideways into his auditor's face and concentrating his argument by a contraction of one eyelid during delivery. The greater number carried in their hands ground ash saplings, using them partly as walking sticks, and partly for poking up pigs, sheep, neighbours with their backs turned, and restful things in general, which seemed to require such treatment in the course of their peregrinations. During conversations each subjected his sapling to great varieties of usage, bending it around his neck, forming an arch of it between his two hands, overweighting it on the ground till it reached nearly a semicircle, or perhaps it was hastily tucked under the arm whilst the sample bag was pulled forth, and a handful of corn poured into the palm, which, after criticism, was flung upon the floor, an issue of events perfectly well known to half a dozen acute town-bred fowls, which had, as usual, crept into the building unobserved, and waited the fulfilment of their anticipations with a high-stretched neck and oblique eye. Among these heavy yeomen a feminine figure glided, the single one of her sex that the room contained. She was prettily and even daintily dressed. She moved between them as a chaise between carts, was heard after them as a romance after sermons, was felt among them like a breeze among furnaces. It had required a little determination, far more than she had at first imagined, to take up a position here, for at her first entry the lumbering dialogues had ceased, nearly every face had been turned towards her, and those that were already turned rigidly fixed there. 2 or 3 only of the farmers were personally known to Bathsheba, and to these she had made her way. But if she was to be the practical woman she had intended to show herself, business must be carried on, introductions or none, and she ultimately acquired confidence enough to speak and reply boldly to men merely known to her by hearsay. Bathsheba, too, had her sample bag, and by degrees adopted a professional pour into the hand, holding up the grains in her narrow palm for inspection in perfect Casterbridge manner. Something in the exact arch of the upper unbroken row of teeth, and in the keenly pointed corners of her red mouth when, with parted lips, she somewhat defiantly turned up her face to argue a point with a tall man, suggested that there was potentiality enough in that lithe slip of humanity for alarming exploits of sex, and daring enough to carry them out. But her eyes had a softness, invariably a softness, which, had they not been dark, would have seemed mistiness. As they were, it lowered an expression that might have been piercing to simple clearness. Strange to say of a woman in full bloom and vigour, she always allowed her interlocutors to finish their statements before rejoining with hers. In arguing on prices she held to her own firmly, as was natural in a dealer, and reduced theirs persistently, as was inevitable in a woman. But there was an elasticity in her firmness which removed it from obstinacy, as there was a naivety in her cheapening which saved it from meanness. Those of the farmers with whom she had no dealings, by far the greater part, were continually asking each other, "Who is she?" The reply would be, "Farmer Everdene's niece. Took on Weatherbury Upper Farm, turned away the bailey, and swears she'll do everything herself." The other man would then shake his head. "Yes, 'tis a pity she's so headstrong," the first would say. "But we ought to be proud of her here. She lightens up the old place. 'Tis such a shapely maid, however, that she'll soon get picked up." It would be ungallant to suggest that the novelty of her engagement in such an occupation had almost as much to do with the magnetism as had the beauty of her face and movements. However, the interest was general, and this Saturday's début in the Forum, whatever it may have been to Bathsheba as the buying and selling farmer, was unquestionably a triumph to her as the maiden. Indeed, the sensation was so pronounced that her instinct on 2 or 3 occasions was merely to walk as a queen among these gods of the fallow, like a little sister of a little Jove, and to neglect closing prices altogether. The numerous evidences of her power to attract were only thrown into greater relief by a marked exception. Women seem to have eyes in their ribbons for such matters as these. Bathsheba, without looking within a right angle of him, was conscious of a black sheep among the flock. It perplexed her first. If there had been a respectable minority on either side, the case would have been almost natural. If nobody had regarded her, she would have taken the matter indifferently, if such cases had occurred. If everybody, this man included, she would have taken it as a matter of course. People had done so before. But the smallness of the exception made the mystery. She soon knew thus much of the recusant's appearance. He was a gentlemanly man, with full and distinctly outlined Roman features, the prominences of which glowed in the sun with a bronze-like richness of tone. He was erect in attitude, and quiet in demeanour. One characteristic preeminently marked him: dignity. Apparently he had some time ago reached that entrance to middle age at which a man's aspect naturally ceases to alter for the term of a dozen years or so, and artificially a woman's does likewise. 35 and 50 were his limits of variation. He might have been either, or anywhere between the two. It may be said that married men of 40 are usually ready and generous enough to fling passing glances at any specimen of moderate beauty they may discern by the way. Probably, as with persons playing whist for love, the consciousness of a certain immunity under any circumstances from that worst possible ultimate, the having to pay, makes them unduly speculative. Bathsheba was convinced that this unmoved person was not a married man. When marketing was over she rushed off to Liddy, who was waiting for her beside the yellow gig in which they had driven to town. The horse was put in, and on they trotted, Bathsheba's sugar, tea, and drapery parcels being packed behind, and expressing in some indescribable manner, by their colour, shape, and general lineaments, that they were the young lady farmer's property, and the grocer's and draper's no more. "I've been through it, Liddy, and it's over. I shan't mind it again, for they will all have grown accustomed to seeing me there. But this morning it was as bad as being married. Eyes everywhere." "I knowed it would be," said Liddy. "Men be such a terrible class of society to look at a body." "But there was one man who had more sense than to waste his time upon me." The information was put in this form that Liddy might not for a moment suppose her mistress to be at all piqued. "A very good-looking man," she continued. "Upright, about 40, I should think. Do you know at all who he could be?" Liddy could not think. "Can't you guess at all?" said Bathsheba with some disappointment. "I haven't a notion. Besides, 'tis no difference, since he took less notice of you than any of the rest. Now, if he'd taken more, it would have mattered a great deal." Bathsheba was suffering from the reverse feeling just then, and they bowled along in silence. A low carriage, bowling along still more rapidly behind a horse of unimpeachable breed, overtook and passed them. "Why, there he is," she said. Liddy looked. That's Farmer Boldwood. Of course it is. The man you couldn't see the other day when he called." "Oh, Farmer Boldwood," murmured Bathsheba, and looked at him as he outstripped them. The farmer had never turned his head once, but with eyes fixed on the most advanced point along the road, passed as unconsciously and abstractedly as if Bathsheba and her charms were thin air. "He's an interesting man, don't you think so?" she remarked. "Oh yes, very. Everybody owns it," replied Liddy. "I wonder why he's so wrapped up and indifferent, and seemingly so far away from all he sees around him." "It is said, but not known for certain, that he met with some bitter disappointment when he was a young man and merry. A woman jilted him, they say." "People always say that, and we know very well women scarcely ever jilt men. 'Tis the men who jilt us. I expect it is simply his nature to be so reserved." "Simply his nature. I expect so, miss. Nothing else in the world." "Still, 'tis more romantic to think he has been served cruelly, poor thing. Perhaps after all he has." "Oh, depend upon it, he has. Oh yes, miss, he has. I feel he must have." "However, we are very apt to think extremes of people. I shouldn't wonder after all if it wasn't a little of both, just between the two. Rather cruelly used, and rather reserved." "Oh dear no, miss. I can't think it between the two." "That is most likely." "Well, yes, so it is. I am convinced it is most likely. You may take my word, miss, that that's what's the matter with him." Chapter 13. Sortes Sanctorum, the Valentine. It was Sunday afternoon in the farmhouse on the 13th of February. Dinner being over, Bathsheba, for want of a better companion, had asked Liddy to come and sit with her. The mouldy pile was dreary in winter time before the candles were lighted and the shutters closed. The atmosphere of the place seemed as old as the walls. Every nook behind the furniture had a temperature of its own, for the fire was not kindled in this part of the house early in the day, and Bathsheba's new piano, which was an old one in other annals, looked particularly sloping and out of level on the warped floor before night threw a shade over its less prominent angles and hid the unpleasantness. Liddy, like a little brook, though shallow, was always rippling. Her presence had not so much weight as to task thought, and yet enough to exercise it. On the table lay an old quarto Bible bound in leather. Liddy, looking at it, said, "Did you ever find out, miss, who you were going to marry by means of the Bible and key?" "Don't be so foolish, Liddy, as if such things could be." "Well, there's a good deal in it all the same." "Nonsense, child." "And it makes your heart beat fearful. Some believe in it, some don't. I do." "Very well, let's try it," said Bathsheba, bounding from her seat with a total disregard of consistency which can be indulged in towards a dependent, and entering into the spirit of divination at once. "Go and get the front door key." Liddy fetched it. "I wish it wasn't Sunday," she said on returning. "Perhaps 'tis wrong." "What's right weekdays is right Sundays," replied her mistress in a tone which was a proof in itself. The book was opened, the leaves, drab with age, being quite worn away at much read verses by the forefingers of unpractised readers in former days, where they were moved along under the line as an aid to the vision. The special verse in the Book of Ruth was sought out by Bathsheba, and the sublime words met her eye. They slightly thrilled and abashed her. It was wisdom in the abstract facing folly in the concrete. Folly in the concrete blushed, persisted in her intention, and placed the key on the book. A rusty patch immediately upon the verse, caused by previous pressure of an iron substance thereon, told that this was not the first time the old volume had been used for the purpose. "Now keep steady and be silent," said Bathsheba. The verse was repeated. The book turned round. Bathsheba blushed guiltily. "Who did you try?" said Liddy curiously. "I shall not tell you." "Did you notice Mr. Boldwood's doing in church this morning, miss?" Liddy continued, adumbrating by the remark the track her thoughts had taken. "No, indeed," said Bathsheba with serene indifference. "His pew is exactly opposite yours, miss." "I know it." "And you did not see his goings-on?" "Certainly I did not, I tell you." Liddy assumed a smaller physiognomy, and shut her lips decisively. This move was unexpected and proportionately disconcerting. "What did he do?" Bathsheba said perforce. "Didn't turn his head to look at you once all the service." "Why should he?" again demanded her mistress, wearing a nettled look. "I didn't ask him to." "Oh, no, but everybody else was noticing you, and it was odd he didn't. There, 'tis like him, rich and gentlemanly. What does he care?" Bathsheba dropped into a silence intended to express that she had opinions on the matter too abstruse for Liddy's comprehension, rather than that she had nothing to say. "Dear me, I had nearly forgotten the valentine I bought yesterday," she exclaimed at length. "Valentine? For who, miss?" said Liddy. "Farmer Boldwood?" It was a single name among all possible wrong ones that just at this moment seemed to Bathsheba more pertinent than the right. "Well, no, it's only for little Teddy Coggan. I have promised him something, and this will be a pretty surprise for him. Liddy, you may as well bring me my desk, and I'll direct it at once." Bathsheba took from her desk a gorgeously illuminated and embossed design in post octavo, which had been bought on the previous market day at the chief stationer's in Casterbridge. In the centre was a small oval enclosure. This was left blank, that the sender might insert tender words more appropriate to the special occasion than any generalities by a printer could possibly be. "Here's a place for writing," said Bathsheba. "What shall I put?" "Something of this sort, I should think," returned Liddy promptly. "The rose is red, the violet's blue, carnation sweet, and so are you." "Yes, that shall be it. It just suits itself to a chubby-faced child like him," said Bathsheba. She inserted the words in a small though legible handwriting, enclosed the sheet in an envelope, and dipped her pen for the direction. "What fun it would be to send it to the stupid old Boldwood, and how he would wonder!" said the irrepressible Liddy, lifting her eyebrows, and indulging in an awful mirth on the verge of fear as she thought of the moral and social magnitude of the man contemplated. Bathsheba paused to regard the idea at full length. Boldwood's had begun to be a troublesome image, a species of Daniel in her kingdom, who persisted in kneeling eastward when reason and common sense said that he might just as well follow suit with the rest and afford her the official glance of admiration which cost nothing at all. She was far from being seriously concerned about his nonconformity. Still, it was faintly depressing that the most dignified and valuable man in the parish should withhold his eyes, and that a girl like Liddy should talk about it. So Liddy's idea was at first rather harassing than piquant. "No, I won't do that. He wouldn't see any humour in it." "He'd worry to death," said the persistent Liddy. "Really, I don't care particularly to send it to Teddy," remarked her mistress. "He's rather a naughty child sometimes." "Yes, that he is." "Let's toss, as men do," said Bathsheba idly. "Now then, head, Boldwood, tail, Teddy. No, we won't toss money on a Sunday. That would be tempting the devil indeed." "Toss this hymn book. There can be no sinfulness in that, miss." "Very well. Open Boldwood, shut Teddy. No, it's more likely to fall open. Open Teddy, shut Boldwood." The book went fluttering in the air and came down shut. Bathsheba, a small yawn upon her mouth, took the pen, and with off-hand serenity directed the missive to Boldwood. "Now light a candle, Liddy. Which seal shall we use? Here's a unicorn's head. There's nothing in that. What's this? 2 doves. No. It ought to be something extraordinary, ought it not, Liddy? Here's one with a motto. I remember it is some funny one, but I can't read it. We'll try this, and if it doesn't do, we'll have another." A large red seal was duly affixed. Bathsheba looked closely at the hot wax to discover the words. "Capital!" she exclaimed, throwing down the letter frolicsomely. "'Twould upset the solemnity of a parson and clerk too." Liddy looked at the words of the seal and read, "Marry me." The same evening the letter was sent, and was duly sorted in Casterbridge post office that night, to be returned to Weatherbury again in the morning. So very idly and unreflectingly was this deed done. Of love as a spectacle Bathsheba had a fair knowledge, but of love subjectively she knew nothing.